We were just talking about 1950 when you flipped that coin and decided to go to New York.
Mm-hmm.
What was New York like in the 50s?
Well, it was a terrific. Even though I came from Chicago, and which was the second largest city in the country, it was a terrific culture shock at first to see everything so small as far as space is concerned. But it was quite thrilling, and I went there with the idea I'm going to have a job, get a job right away, which I did, just to earn money to live on and a place to live, which I had. And so it took me a while to save a few dollars and look for work, stop working. I had a friend of mine, and now a friend, there was a temporary office service, and I could type because I learned that in the Navy, and I got with his service, and I worked in offices, and I'd work for a week or so, save a few dollars, then go make the rounds like everybody else did. And then I had to take all kinds of other jobs. I was a doorman the hat check guy at Lindy's, which was one of the most famous restaurants in New York. I was the doorman of the Tavern on the Green. So
See a lot of stars come in the door?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I lost my job at Lindy's not because of him, but what I did with Joe Louis. He was, of course, this was after his fighting days, but he came in one night and he had the most gorgeous camel hair coat I ever saw in my life. And with the belt, not in belt holes, just wrapped around him and tied. And I took his coat and hung it up, and then he went and had dinner or whatever he was doing, and when he was leaving, he took out a $5 bill and stuck it in my little jacket pocket. I said, I can't take this. And he said, why not? I said, well, in the first place, we're not allowed to take tips. I said, but actually, I said, this $5 could not in any way express the joy that you gave me from watching you fight. And the head of the concessions was standing behind him, and he went, and he fired me. And then they moved me over to, they also had the concession at the Tavern on the Green, and I think they were afraid that I might say something, so they put me over there. And there were a lot of odd jobs. I worked in offices in Wall Street, and this and that, and every place I seemed to work, they said, listen, you want a job here permanently? I said, no. The money, it was tempting, the idea of working and getting a paycheck every. But I said no. I said I gotta keep trying.
What were you focusing on at this point? Theater?
Yeah. All theater. Yeah. All theater.
Because television really was still.
Well, television was really blooming by then. Live, great writers, wonderful directors, but tough to crack. There was still that coterie of working actors that were doing both the theater and television. Television for me really happened after I had a couple of very successful off-Broadway shows in which I got recognition, and that led to what turned out to be 3 Hallmark Hall of Fame shows. The third being Alice in Wonderland, which was really a wonderful role and a lot of fun. Wonderful fun with that.
What about the first 2? Do you recall the name?
Yeah, the first one was Born Yesterday. And it was interesting because Garson Kanin was directing it. He wrote it. And when he wrote it originally, Jean Arthur was supposed to play Billy Dawn. And they got as far as New Haven or wherever it was they were trying out, and she left the show. And that's how Judy Holliday came into being. And so now he was doing it with Mary Martin because he still wanted to see how it sounded with somebody from the Texas. It was written for a Texas gal. And Paul Douglas, who had created his original role. And I just had a small part where they make their grand entrance into this hotel in Washington, and I'm sort of showing them around. And then the next one we did was a play by Molnar called The Good Fairy with Julie Harris. Wonderful, wonderful actress. And I just had a little bit part in that. And then they did Alice in Wonderland, with a huge all-star cast. And I played the Jack of Hearts who stole the tarts.
Now, describe the Hallmark Hall of Fame format at that point. How long of a show was it? What kind of...
It was an hour show, and it was produced by, well, it had several producers. First one that I worked for was Maurice Evans, famous actor. And he was the producer, and the director was a wonderful, wonderful man. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, George Schaefer. And ironically, he was partially responsible for me getting an audition for Fiorello many years later, because I worked musical stock for him down in Dallas at the Dallas State Musical Fair. And on my resume, he was one of the ones they contacted and wanted to know how I did in musicals. And it was a wonderful working atmosphere, Hallmark. They did them out in Brooklyn, in this huge studio usually, because there were a lot of sets and things. And this was all live, you know, exciting.
What was live like?
Well, it was like the theater. You got out there on your own. I mean, you had to be told where to move at a certain time because of the cameras. But you were out there on your own, just like you were in the theater, and that made it very exciting.
What about leading up to actually going on the air? Was it chaotic, or was it like a calming factor?
Well, that was a very unusual experience, because the little girl who was playing Alice, I can't remember, one of her parents or grandmother died during rehearsal the last few days, and they somehow didn't tell her. And I don't know whether they ever did or not before the show, but she just was a real trooper, and we were all, you know, terribly concerned, spent too much time probably watching her and making sure that she was standing on her own 2 feet. But it was an exciting production and a lot of fun to do.
Describe George Schaefer for us. What kind of director was he?
George was a director who had all the technical aspects that were needed to do a production, and they were up here, and he didn't bore the actors with it. The actors were discussing the script, the points that he wanted to be made, but he always hired actors that he knew were capable of doing what they were supposed to do, because after all, television is a compromise to film, to the extent that everything has to be done quicker in a shorter space of time. And in rehearsal, it was amazing, because we'd work in these huge rooms and have to run from one part of the room to the other, where they had the set all marked out on the floor. He was in a wheelchair. He'd sit in a wheelchair and roll from one to the other, which was, you know, saved him a little running and walking back. He was just a dear man.
Now, soon after you made your Broadway debut, tell us about that.
Well, I lived in an apartment building that I shared on Central Park West, and it was just 2 apartments on the floor. And this all started really with the elevator man in that building. And he said to me, you know, across the hall, the apartment was owned by Arthur Penn, a well-known director. And he wasn't there. He had it leased out to Hope Lang and Don Murray, who were married at the time and working in the theater. He says, you know, they're going to do a production of Fiorello LaGuardia, a show about LaGuardia. He says, you look so much like him. He says, you ought to get an agent to submit you.
Describe who LaGuardia was.
He was the great mayor of New York City from the late 30s right through the mid-40s. And the city loved him, the people loved him. He was an independent. He didn't play politics with anybody. If there was a strike, negotiations. He'd lock them in a room and wouldn't let anybody go home until it was settled. He was that kind of a guy. Went to all the fires. So they had been trying to find someone to play it, because there had been talk at one time of doing a straight play about him, and that disappeared. And Arthur Penn was originally scheduled to direct this. They couldn't find anybody to play it, and I'd forgotten all about now what this elevator man had told me. And I had done some summer stock that summer, and an agent, I wasn't signed with an agent, but he handled it. And he called me up one day and he said, I'm going to send you up for an audition. They're doing a Broadway musical of Fiorello. LaGuardia called Fiorello. So I went and I read, and they thanked me, and then about a week went by and I got called back again and they thanked me. And I got called back again, and the agent kept saying, he says, I think you're getting close to this. I said, I don't understand it. They said, they're not going to give me the lead in a Broadway show. I've never been on Broadway. I said, that's a tremendous responsibility. And then when I was waiting to audition, go in the last time, I see this guy get out of the car to go run into the theater. He looked more like LaGuardia than LaGuardia did. But to my surprise, when I got on the stage, he was in the pit playing the piano for someone. Well, that's what happened. And they said, they called me up and said, the part is yours.
Wonderful.
And
that was a 2-year run, right?
Just short of 2 years.
1959 started?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you won a Tony for that, correct?
Yes, I did.
Great thrill.
It was. It was just exciting. And it was exciting in more ways than one, because it was probably the healthiest time on Broadway in, I don't know how long before, or certainly since there hasn't been a time like it. Everybody was in successful shows. There was a kind of excitement in the theater that I think that every actor wanted to be a part of. And it was great. And I did, I think, 6 shows in 6 or 8 shows over a period of time. And even though a couple of them were bombs, it was just a great thrill. And I met my first wife there, and we got married, and it was the beginning to start a family. So all that was very exciting.
I forgot to mention about an experience a couple of years into living in New York where you studied with Lee Strasberg. Is that correct?
Yes.
How was that experience like?
Horrible. I'm not going to condemn the man. I mean, he did no good, nothing for me. I was with him for about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months. And he used to terrorize people, and I saw him destroy what I thought was a lot of good talent. And you worked to do a scene for him, and I did a scene with this gal who was responsible for me getting into his class, who, by the way, is Arthur Penn, Sean Penn's mother. And I did this scene with her, and she'd been with him for 2-3 years, and he just ripped her to shreds. And I just sat there and I said, oh my God, I'm next, And then he said, turns to me and he said, have you ever worked this way before? Well, of course, I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And I said, well, a little bit. And he said, that was fine. And that was the end of it. And, I did not go there to be told that everything was all right. I wanted to stretch, and I wanted to grow, and he wasn't helping me do that, He was good for a lot of people, and I respected him. I knew him. Later on, I had good relations with him. I once did a play, off-Broadway play, and I ran into him on the street and told him I was having a terrible time, and he said, what's the play? Describe the part. And I said, I just don't know what to do. He says, that's the character. This guy does nothing. And it worked.
Less is more.
Yeah.
But certainly by being in plays on Broadway and watching other people, you learn in every experience.
Oh, yeah.
I have to say, just because of the body of work that you've done over the years, that fortunately we can't talk about all of it.
Oh, of course.
So you did a bunch of plays throughout, of course. You continued to balance theater with television and movies.
I did, and then after my daughter was born, and I was making trips out here back and forth, I said, this is too much. Let's move to California, because if they want me for a play, then I'll go and do it. But it just wasn't good going back and forth like this.
1960, I want to mention also about a television special on CBS called The Right Man.
Mm-hmm.
Any memories from that?
Very much so. The Right Man was a political show, sort of a spoof, in which a great cast of wonderful stars were playing different presidents during political campaigns. We had Edward G. Robinson playing Teddy Roosevelt. Art Carney played FDR. Thomas Mitchell, just a huge cast. And I was the only one that played a fictitious character, which was a character called Throttlebottom from the musical of Thee I Sing. He was the Vice President of the United States in the production. So it just was wonderful, wonderful time.
Was this risky at all at that point, doing a political type of satire?
No, because a lot of it was his history. There were a few humorous incidents, and when you tell a story, maybe about an ex-president in those days, nothing they did was that serious. Today we learn a lot more about old presidents, but I think it was the idea of the 1960 election, the Kennedy-Nixon race, which was so exciting and so close, as we all know. And it was just a great idea that they did, and there was music to it, and I can't even remember who directed it.
It was also, it was actually Burt Sheveloff.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Burt Sheveloff, wonderful, wonderful guy. Good writer, too.
Yeah. And this was during what is known as the Great Debates in 1960.
That's correct.
Did that have any influence on the material? Do you remember?
I don't think so. It was exciting for me because I was still doing Fiorello. And when we were out of town before the show came in, we were in Philadelphia, and I'm doing a matinee one afternoon, and I see this woman's purse in the front row going back and forth to the music, and she's driving me nuts. And it was Jackie Kennedy. And she came backstage afterward and introduced us. She says, "Oh, I just love the show." And she said, "I can't wait till my husband comes and sees it when we get to New York." And well, then a few months later, he won his first primary in West Virginia, I believe it was. And sure enough, right after that, they came backstage, which was all very exciting. Politics was a big thing then, so this was a lighter side of it that was going on. Because that election was a real battle.
Right. And television had a great influence on that.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
You crossed paths with many people over your career, one of which is George Schaefer, and you met up with him in Arsenic and Lace, also on Hallmark.
Yes.
Any memories on that?
Wonderful memories. Again, live. Tony Randall playing the lead. And the two ladies, one was Mildred Natwick, and the other one was Dorothy Stickney, whose husband had been a great writer, Life with Father, an actor. And I was playing the character that is a little bit nuts, and he's Teddy Roosevelt. And in the cast, of course, was Boris Karloff. Now, he was living across the street from me, and Tony Randall was living around the corner, and we would rehearse in Brooklyn. And one Sunday, we're all late, and I had a little bug Volkswagen. So here I pile these two giants into this car, and we start speeding down the East Side Highway, and sure enough, a policeman stops. And Tony says, I'll take care of this. I'll take care of this. So before he gets to open his mouth, the cop sticks his head and he says, "Aren't you Tom Bosley?" I said, "Yes." He says, "You're the guy playing Fiorello LaGuardia." I said, "Well, Tony just sank." You know, I was able to get out of it by myself. And then the damnedest thing, I'll never forget it. We were rehearsing, and Boris was so bow-legged you could have driven a car between his legs. And he's got this scene, he's coming down the stairs, and he slips and he goes head first, tumbling all the way down the stairs. Screams, and I pick him up, and I'm holding him in my arms, and I said, "Are you all right?" And he looked up at me and he said, "I'll never play this part again." He was such a sweet, soft, gentle man. It's amazing, the actors that I've known who play heavies and killers, and their hearts are huge. It's just been a marvelous experience meeting and working with so many of these people.
You also did a bunch of guest appearances in about 1963. Car 54, Where Are You?
Yes.
Any memories on that?
Not really. That was Nat Hiken, who was a great comedy writer, comedy producer, and he was doing the Vilko Show, was his creation. It was just a guest shot. I played a phony priest as posing as and I'm a gambler, really, posing as a priest, and I take the cops in a poker game. That's basically what I was.
First character you ever played as a priest, perhaps?
I think so, probably.
Route 66, also one of those memorable.
Yes, I did two of them.
Mm-hmm.
One was a script that they had shot, and one of the lead actors, George Maharis, had left the show, and they never got to finish it. So it was like 3-4 months later, I went down to Florida and shot a couple of scenes. And the other one was in Maine with Joan Crawford. It was a 2-hour opening for the season. We ate a lot of lobsters at 5 o'clock in the morning, steamed lobsters. And, you know, you can only go so far with that.
The hardships of on location.
Yes.
That was The Week That Was, NBC.
That was The Week That Was what's the English guy that had that?
Elliot Reed was the host.
No.
Oh.
Well, he wasn't really the host.
Kind of a...
The Englishman that became so famous doing interviews, I can't think of his name now. Anyway, yes, Elliot Reed was on the show. It was a satire, a sort of cleaner version of Saturday Night Live.
David Frost is what you're thinking of?
Yes. David Frost. And I did about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 of them. It was wonderful. In fact, one of the writers to this day is still a very dear friend of mine.
His name?
Sal Turtletop.
Panichevsky did something called Marty. As I understand it, you were cast in the pilot for a series called Marty. How did that come about?
Well, they were going to do it, and I was still living in New York, and this is rather strange. 2 different agents in the same agency in California called me like 2 hours apart saying that I've got an offer to do Marty, and the other one says, you got an offer to do Barnaby, which was a TV version of the cartoon strip Barnaby. So I'm now placed and apparently both agents accepted on my behalf without saying anything to me. And I'm in this terrible, terrible predicament about, my God, so my agent, the head of the agency, was in New York, and he says, what do you want to do? And I said, well, if I'm going to lose one and gain one, I would much rather go with Marty, because it's a much more prestigious material, and if it works, you know. So the people involved with Barnaby at the William Morris office were going to sue me. So I get to California, and fortunately, sometimes nepotism is a great weapon. An uncle of mine was a very close friend with the head of William Morris. And William Morris told him, he says, leave the kid alone. Let him do what he wants to do. And I did. I did the pilot of Marty. Unfortunately, it didn't sell.
Had you seen the original?
Oh, yes. Well, I didn't see the original television show with Rod Steiger.
Right.
But, of course, I saw the movie with Ernie Borgnine.
And you had heard about the television show, the impact of that show.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the motion picture as well.
They made it terrible. A friend of mine, actually, he's my daughter's father-in-law. He wrote the original script, which was a wonderful script, but the network didn't like it because it didn't have enough characters in it. And so they asked for another script, and they wrote this terrible thing about a relative of Marty's chickening out on getting married. But that character ended up having the part, and you don't do that in a pilot, you know. But it was my first pilot, and I didn't have any control over it, and so it went by way of all flesh.
Did Barnaby happen?
Barnaby happened many years later, oddly enough, with an actor who was my understudy in Fiorello on Broadway, Sorrel Book. But it never, I don't think it ever really got on the air. If it did, it didn't last very long.
Small world sometimes.
Mm.
1969, you appeared in the pilot episode of Marcus Welby, MD.
Yeah, you're leaving out one thing
Only
before
one?
that that was very dear to my heart because...
Please tell us.
Well, it was the Profiles in Courage series based on John Kennedy's book.
Right.
I did that when I came out here. I was still living in New York. And played a senator from Nebraska named George Norris.
This is on NBC in
Yes.
65.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And the interesting thing about this was George Norris and Fiorello LaGuardia wrote the Norris-LaGuardia Act, which was the terrible immigration laws that we had up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, which was just a coincidence. But I worked with a wonderful director who was very hot at the time, Stu Rosenberg, and wonderful English actor, Torrin Thatcher. And that was a wonderful experience, just to be privileged to do the material of Profiles in Courage, because it was an award-winning series and everything. Now you can go on where you were.
Well, actually, at that point, we'll change tapes.